As Australian Catholics prepare to honour Pope Francis' legacy, current and former members of the clergy are reflecting on his contribution to the Church. Dr. Paul Collins is an historian and former Catholic priest and joins us now from Canberra. Now, Dr. Collins, Pope Francis was born in Argentina to two Italian immigrants. What can you tell us about his early life?
Well, they were very working class people, really, his parents, and they were supporters of the Argentinian dictator Juan Perón. They were fairly strong Peronistas, actually. But he, after done a number of ordinary work jobs as a young man, he then decided to join the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus. And after his ordination, and as a very young superior in the Jesuits, he became the head of the Jesuits in the whole of Argentina. Now, the difficulty that he faced in that period was, of course, that was the period of the military junta. It was a very oppressive period. There were many people disappeared. Anybody who protested tended to disappear. And there was some criticism of him that he hadn't been strong enough to support some of his own more radical Jesuit colleagues. However, I think nowadays people see that much more in perspective. It was obviously a tremendous experience for him, because I think it did change his life. Because after he finished as provincial, he then went off and began a PhD in Germany, which I don't think he completed, and then returned to Argentina, eventually became the auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires and then the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and he was made a cardinal by Pope John Paul II.
And that was in 2001, I understand. Can you tell us a bit more about how he rose through the ranks?
Well, I mean, it's a kind of an interesting career, because he really seems to have been in exile for a while. He lived well out of Buenos Aires, right out in a kind of a fairly isolated city. He seems to have, I think, been a man who went through a very difficult period. I think it was probably a period of tremendous growth for him, but I think a very, very difficult period. But the Cardinal of Buenos Aires was impressed with him. That's how he ended up as the auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires. In as many ways, that cardinal, his predecessor, who really created his career, so to speak, in the hierarchy of the Argentinian church. When he became Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, much of his ministry was with the poor. He was a man who never had airs and graces. He travelled on the bus and public transport. He constantly visited the poorer parishes of his archdiocese and was very beloved by people. He somehow or other he came out of this period of exile, if you like, as a warm and very decent human being.
And that has carried on right through his career. When he was elected as Pope on the 13th of March 2013, more than 12 years ago now, what do you remember about that night when Catholics around the world found out?
Well, I was in Rome for the election. I was working for the ABC in Rome, covering the election. And I still remember going down into the Piazza of St. Peter's as he came out onto the veranda for his first really public announcement. Now, there were probably 250,000 people in the piazza, and Italian crowds tend to be very loud, and they all tend to be talking a lot. When he came out, he actually created silence in the piazza. It was the most extraordinary experience. I heard Archbishop the Archbishop of Brisbane, Archbishop Mark Coleridge, who was there at the time also, and he made the same comment on the ABC News tonight. It was actually a quite extraordinary experience. Um, and it was simply the presence of the man, I think, that created that. Um, he's very different to his two predecessors. He's very different to Pope Benedict XVI and John Paul II, who were both, uh, if you like, who are much more, if you like, I hate to use this word ideological because it comes with loaded with kind of implications. But they were guys who emphasized, well, this is what you've got to do to be good, and this is what you've got to do to be right. They were very theoretical. They were professorial in their approach. The thing about Pope Francis is that right from the start you perceived a normal, sensible, grounded, warm, kind human being.
And how did he tackle the challenges that lay ahead of him? When he was elected, would you agree it was one of the most tumultuous periods in the Church's modern history after Pope Benedict XVI retired? What can you tell us about the tasks that lay ahead for Pope Francis?
Well, it was an extraordinary business when Benedict XVI resigned. In fact, I think, in my view, it's the most significant thing that a pope has done for centuries, in a way, because the last, certain papal resignation was back in the 1200s. So we're talking 800 years or more ago. So the thing about Francis was that he tackled the issues that are important. The first thing that you felt about him was that he was a very pastoral man. He was a man who reached out to people, who actually cared about ordinary people's lives. But it didn't mean that he didn't understand the real problems that the world was facing. I mean, he is the Pope, after all, who's written probably the most significant encyclical of all, which is the encyclical Laudato Si on the environment, on the loss of biodiversity, on global warming. He's tackled those big world issues. Within the Church itself, in many ways, what he's trying to do is to set a whole other way of operating within the church by drawing lay people into the church's governance, by drawing women into the church's governance. At the recent synod in Rome, he back late last year. There were some 50 women in attendance there, several of them acting as chairs, who had a vote. There are a whole lot of laymen there who had a vote. Previous to that, it was only bishops. So what he's tried to do is to set a whole new way of operating within the church.
And how did he do that? How did he bridge the gaps or address the issues that perhaps his predecessors could not?
Well, I think part of it is just his way of operating. He relates to people. He says he gets them to participate. He draws them in. The other previous popes, I mean, Pius XII, who died in 1958, John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, these guys were, they were kind of stood above normal human beings. They were somehow kind of supermen. I mean, John Paul II was really a genuine personality in the world of his time. But what Francis did is that he related to people. He drew them in and gave them a sense that they could participate and that what they had to say was important. He listened to them. That's what I mean by his pastoral sense, his pastoral care for people.
So what impact has he had then on expectations from Catholics around the world about how the next Pope should lead the Church?
Well, look, I think he has changed the Church. He's changed it in the sense that he has gone back to the Second Vatican Council, the big renewal council of the Catholic Church in the 1960s, which were in many ways pretty much ignored by his two predecessors. He has actualized so much of that council, made it real for the church. The challenge that he leaves is that the person who follows him is either going to have to pick up the task that Pope Francis began, which is a much more consultative, I hesitate to say democratic because Catholic conservatives leap on me if you say democratic, but a truly participative church is what he's modelled. Um, I look at the 3 or 4 possible candidates for next pope. I think 3 of 4, I think, will follow his example. Cardinal Parolin, who was his Secretary of State, who's essentially his Prime Minister and Foreign Minister combined. Another Italian, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, the Archbishop of Bologna, very much a bishop in the tradition of Pope Francis, and the Filipino bishop, who was formerly the Archbishop of Manila, is now in Rome, Cardinal Tagle. All 3 of them, I think, would certainly be following Pope Francis' lead.
Dr. Paul Collins, really good to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you.